Texas at the 12th Armored Reunion. Today I'm interviewing Brad Dressler. And thanks for coming and talking. And I want to know, first of all, your parents' names, mom and dad's first full names, and brothers and sisters, and kind of where you came from.
Okay, my father's name was Joseph Dressler. My mother's name was Sarah Dressler. My father was from Germany. My mother was from Hungary.
What was her maiden name? Before
Samuels. And I'm an only child, which they were very thankful for at the time, I think. And I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And I went to public school and high school, and then I went off to the wilds of Illinois to go to school, University of Illinois, at which point we had a little thing called Pearl Harbor, which I sat on the campus that morning and listened to Mr. President Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech, and immediately got up and headed towards the enlistment office, but I had to go by the dormitory first, and there was a phone call from my father, who said, "Don't you dare." So I, being obedient at that point anyway, I signed up for something called Enlisted Reserve Corps. And this is in December of '41. And because I had agreed with the university to stay in school and get an education, they put me in the Enlisted Reserve Corps, and they gave me a piece of paper, which I treasured until my mother threw it out when she moved, which said I was deferred until February 1945, which went along pretty good for about a month and a half. And my roommate wakes me up one day and he said, "You better get down to Huff Gym." I says, "Why?" He said, "They got some lists posted." And they called up the ERC. I said, "Nah, I'm deferred," So I went down there, and they had old-fashioned blackboards, and they were about 8 foot high. Top piece of paper, left-hand corner, report to Battle Creek, Michigan, in 7 days. My name was on the list. So I went home. I went to Battle Creek, Michigan, and they issued me a uniform, stuck me full of needles, and put me on a train for Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, a place called Camp Robinson, where the 12th has his monument. And did basic there, and then I had some ranger training, and then they decided they're going to put everybody in school so they can have a great post-war government thing called the Army Specialized Training Program. So off we went. I went into Baton Rouge, and they had qualifying tests, what you were best qualified to do. Seeing as my then girlfriend lived in Chicago, and one of the schools was enrolled with ASTP to teach advanced French, I immediately went back to the barracks and studied my 2 years. I had 2 years of high school French and a year of college French. So I practiced very diligently. I went to the interview, and I passed with flying colors. And that's how I got to ride the train to New Mexico to study civil engineering. This is the Army functioning, naturally. I didn't even know where New Mexico was. And there's a place called New Mexico School of Mines in a typical, traditional Western town. And I was, at that point in time, slightly military happy. I'd grown up without any education, thinking Custer was a genius. Loved horses. Was in the ROTC in Illinois. I played polo for them. I was in the cavalry, and there I was in a western town, which was great, It was unusual, because in this town, every family adopted a GI from this program.
This is in Alamogordo?
No, Socorro, New Mexico. So we all had homes and families. And that lasted about 9 months. And suddenly, bingo, So, up until that time in my life, and pardon me if I break up a little bit, but up until that time in my life, we were taught men do not cry. It's not manly. It destroys the image of the macho man. So we got on the train that morning. We all cried. We got to the 12th Armored, and they cried because they got unloaded with some 400 ASTPers who didn't know a tank from a pickup truck. They were all had basic training. That was fine, but they knew nothing. And the 12th Armored Division was gearing up to ship overseas. So they didn't know what to do with these people. So they stuffed us back in some of the infantry, some artillery. I ended up in the infantry. Unfortunately, about 3 weeks after I got there, I got bronchitis. And in the course of the examination, they discovered that I'd had an inguinal hernia since I was 2. So they said, "What are you doing in the infantry?" I said, "Well, I passed all the tests. I qualified. I was an expert." "That's not the point. You're not supposed to be in the infantry." So stateside, the lowest form of animal life in the Army was a medic. He was down there somewhere below it, way below a private, because nobody understood. Don't forget, we were all, with the exception of some of the cadre, you're talking about an army of 19 and 20-year-old greenhorns, farm kids, city kids who knew nothing. Bearing in mind that the child of 15, for instance, in 1940, was equivalent to today's 8-year-old, because today's education teaches them so much so fast. We didn't learn it that way. We didn't know from nothing. We knew war movies. We knew how John Wayne and so on, Wayne Morris, all the rest of them, it was a big deal. So they took me away from the infantry and put me into the medics. And there I was, a pill roller. I was miserable. I didn't have much time to be miserable because suddenly we start packing up and away we went, you know. We got on the train and we went from Barclay to, I don't know what the hell the route was, all over hell and gone. And I'm watching out the window because I'd done all my train travel between Chicago and Illinois and New York and Chicago. And suddenly I recognized the Chicago stock, the yards, you know. And I said, "We're in Chicago." Well, somebody heard me, so they immediately switched tracks and we went east again. We ended up outside of Weehawken, New Jersey, which is right near the port of embarkation. And I was still a medic, and then we went overseas. And they separated the convoy. They broke it up about 200 miles off the coast because they had reports of submarines. So instead of going into the port we were intended to go into, Southampton, we went into Bristol. And that was our introduction to wartime. I mean, motorcycle riders, just like World War I pictures, you know, with the leather caps and the long leather coats and and no signs, and we didn't know where we were. There were no signs. The fear of invasion, they pulled down all the road signs. So we ended up in, I forget what the name of it, Ludgershall. And that was the camp that we were in for a while. All the 12th Armored equipment was picked up by Patton because it went straight to France, and they wanted that real bad. So we had to wait while they refitted us. And then we went, got into France, we went across the Channel, and I was still in the medical company, yelling like mad, complaining everywhere because I hated being a medic, you know. And I've been trained as an infantryman. I was a good shot. What am I doing, you know, standing around here with nothing in my hands? So we worked our way across France, landed au Fait, and from there we went east, and I forget what town, where we stopped. It was near the Maginot Line. It was just west of Bitche, Bitche. And we were in this town, and they, because I was such an intractable individual, I did a lot of KP. And I did a lot of digging of latrines.
What got you that job?
My mouth got me the job, because I did not like the idea of, what it all started with, they put me on guard duty, and they handed me a 2x4. And I said, where's my rifle? He says, well, we're a medical company. We don't carry weapons. You carry the 2x4. And this is the first sergeant. His name was Peterson, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And he never forgave me, because I told him, I says, you give me a 2x4, I'm going to bend it over your head. I'm not going out in that street when they're shooting at me and I'm going to have a 2x4 to throw back at them. So they transferred me to KP, and then latrines. And when the day that I finished the enlisted man's latrine. And Peterson comes out and said, get over there and dig one over there for the officers. So, and then he hands me a double-bitted axe, and he says, go chop some wood, posts up, and put the little flaps up. So I never have been known for having a long fuse. I flipped, and I went into the captain's office carrying the axe, and I slammed it down on the desk, and I said, I don't care what you do to me, but I am not digging a latrine for all of it. I just finished 4 hours of guard duty, 3 hours on the latrine, and I'm not going to spend another 3 hours out there in the day. So they punished me. They found a form of punishment. They sent me up to the front to serve with a tank company. I was a medic with a tank company. Now, if you've noticed something lacking in my narration so far, and that is no medical training.
I was fixing to ask you, what training did you get?
There was no time for it. They were too busy packing up. So I knew nothing about the normal procedures of medical. But I took the assignment, I grabbed it because I wanted to get away from these people, you know. So I ended up in the C Company, the 23rd Tank Battalion, and I was assistant to the aide man who'd been there for about 4 weeks. And he didn't particularly want an assistant, but it gave him a chance to stay back in the medical attachment with everybody else. And he said, you take the Jeep and go up with C Company and stay there with him, which I did for the rest of the war. And he came back up, but we had a very bad night real early on. We were bivouacked out in a field somewhere. 155 artillery pieces were behind us. And they opened up a barrage. They went on for about 40 minutes. And the only thing more terrifying is to be on the receiving end of the barrage, but this time we were underneath the guns. And he got very upset. And
just lost your speaker.
It doesn't stay on, is the problem.
Wait, other direction. Okay.
So, come daylight, he says, I'm going back to battalion. And he took the Jeep and took off. The Jeep came back about 4 hours later with another driver, and he says, are you Dressler? I said, well, this is your Jeep. I says, where's Willis? He says, he's gone. They tagged him, which in their parlance meant that he had suddenly become a patient. He'd had too much, and he just wasn't ready for it. Of course, neither was I, because I didn't know what was coming. So I ended up with my own Jeep. And the only thing I remember about that first week was that the first thing that these strange people in C Company did is hand me a tube of Barbasol shaving cream. Now, we haven't come across this yet. When you put the windshield of a Jeep down, the wind hits you in the face. When it is cold, that wind is cold, and your face chaps and nothing flat. So you rub it down with Barbasol. And then that's the beginning of whatever you want to talk about. The incidents, what happened after that was I learned by watching and doing that what my job was to pick up the casualties of C Company, put them on. I had 2 stretchers lengthwise across the hood and one across the back deck of the Jeep. And you took the casualties from the tank, or if there were infantry, whatever, you know, and back to the end of the column where they had a medical truck with a doctor, and he had enough equipment to do what, if it was an automobile, you say first echelon maintenance, stop the blood long enough for the ambulances shuttle back and forth between the evac hospitals and the end of the tank columns to take the stretcher and the ambulance and take them back to the hospital. The Jeep was a normal World War II Jeep with a white flag painted on the hood. The width and length of the hood with a red cross. Then there was an angle iron that came up in front of the hood. The idea was that was to cut the wires that they would string to cut your head off. And they hung a great big 4-foot white flag on that. And if you've ever done any shooting, you know what a white background and a red cross means as far as marksmanship is concerned. I mean, it's a marvelous target. And the other equipment that I was required to wear was a brassard across the left arm, white brassard with a red cross. And they issued me a helmet with 2 3-inch circles, red crosses in the middle, one on each temple. So the first time a tank was hit, they hollered medic. I didn't hear them. They had to holler 3 times down the column because I rode at the end of the column. And I ran up there and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do, but somebody said, there's casualties in there. Okay, that equated with get them out of the tank. So I got them out of the tank. I found some bandages in the aid kit. I closed up the wounds, put them on the stretcher, and drove them back. That went on for a couple of days, and then I realized that this thing wasn't very practical. So I took the helmet I tossed away. I found a casualty from 3rd Infantry Division, and he didn't need his helmet anymore, so I took that, threw mine away, and put mud on the brassard so it matched my tanker jacket. And then I went to maintenance. I said, put a siren on this thing. He said, what for? I said, well, when I come back from the head of that column, these guys got to know I'm coming and get the hell out of the way because I can't handle 4 casualties and drive with 1 set of wheels in the ditch. So they did that. And then I added a few other embellishments. I mean, I carried a M1 rifle and a box of tracer ammunition and regular ammunition in the back of the Jeep, a case of grenades, and I liberated from, I won't say who, a .45 caliber pistol, and I carried it in a shoulder holster. I carried a P-38 because the philosophy was really basic. I mean, if you wanted to survive, the Geneva rules of land warfare were very interesting and very rigid, but they didn't read them. Our guys did, and we had to obey them, but they didn't read them. So I decided that I would do my own protecting if necessary, which I did. And most of the job that I had to do, which is very basic, really, is to get the casualties from the tanks as quick as possible, stop whatever you can in the way of bleeding if they're alive, and get them back to the aid state at the end of the column. You also had you pulled the casualties out, the fatalities, took them out, and as someone said last night, we stacked them like cordwood. Pull the bottom ID, dog tag, and we'd lay them alongside the road. Graves of his registration would come by and pick them up every night. So that's what a combat medic is supposed to do. You want to know what I did? That's what I did. Now, you got any questions? Figured you would.
Where was do you remember the location of the first action that you faced?
We were south and east south actually of a town called Bitche, B-I-T-C-H-E. And that was our first introduction to combat, and we remember, a lot of us, I remember it because of and I'm not sure of the town, it's still very dim, but I remember because that was my first introduction to screaming Mimes, which was a German artillery shell with holes punched in it. And the psychological effect of having this screaming thing come down on you was tremendous, And we were scared. We were scared all the time. We were terrified. And we were talking last night, and somebody said, well, everybody was scared. Yeah. How did you handle it? Some of us were scared, and we just froze and stayed behind the wheel. Other guys ducked in the tank. And if there was machine gun fire, I went under the tank. But a lot of guys couldn't cope with this kind of a nervous strain, and these are the guys that I would have to tag and send back. It was called battle fatigue in World War II.
What made you able to do this? What attributes in yourself did you have them when you came to the Army? Or is it something that you...
Have what?
The attribute to be able to live in the tension and stand it and...
I was 14 years old when I was 13, I guess. We were playing in the street, and one of the guys was playing football, and he fell catching a ball, and one of these metal stakes that they had around little pieces of grass in the city, and the metal thing went right through the calf of his leg. I saw the blood, I fainted. Because all right, never mind.
I'm going to get this thing and I'm going to make it stick. There.
It's no specific attribute. I had fainted at the sight of blood. When they put me in a medical corps, I thought to myself, good God, what's going to happen the next time I see blood, But you go over there, you're 19, 20 years old, you're really green. You're not a today's 20-year-old. You're very naive. And all of a sudden, you are exposed to this unbelievable existence. The will to survive, the instinct to survive, is strong in every animal. Whether you can call on it in time, bring it up and use it, that's something else. I don't consider it an attribute. It's an instinct that every human being has it. But some of us are good at sublimating it and some are not. And when you suddenly realize you're shocked out of your idyllic existence when you realize that that guy over there that just fired a gun is about to kill you, and you've never seen a dead body in your life except in a funeral parlor, how do you handle it? Look at the records of how many kids went back because they couldn't handle it. It's inbred. If you let it loose, you can survive. If you start to ask questions like, what, you're dead. The had a lieutenant in basic who had been an enlisted man at Pearl Harbor, and he was the worst we'd ever had. He was vicious. He was tough. And he only had one thing in mind. He kept saying, look, as tough as I am, it'll be tougher out there. Don't stop to ask. When the guy says, hit the deck, hit the deck. Don't argue with him. And he was right. Develop that, you develop the instinct. Develop the instinct, you survive. There's no attribute. I write, so I tried the words, the courage, the bravery. No. No, it is really, you were hired to do a job. When we were kids, we were taught you do a good day's work for a day's pay. You don't slack, you don't cheat. We were hired to do a job. So we took this ethic with us. And you did the job. The only problem I had personally was that nobody told me what my damn job was. So I had to make it up as I go along. So, in addition to doing what the medic does, I spent a lot of time. I had the only wheeled vehicle in the column, so the guys love to drive the car after driving a tank, So I'd swap places and ride the back of the tanks, and I'd use a rifle to shoot at anything that moved. And we picked up a lot of prisoners that way because they would be hiding there, and a lot of guys alongside the road with Panzerfausts. You've heard about this, I presume. You know what they are. And as a medic, I hated them because I had to pick up the pieces. Because when they fired a Panzerfaust, it went in with a hole like that, but when it got inside and exploded, there was like 250 pieces of shrapnel all spinning around inside this tank with 5 guys in it. You had a very messy cleanup job. So I hated the Panzerfaust. But no, there's no attributes. You look at the people that survived and you realize they survived because they wanted to survive. and they let their own basic instincts rule them rather than, and this is where I differ with today's Army, we don't debate the issue. You don't argue whether or not that guy with the gun might kill you. You kill him first. Because if you don't, he's going to blow your head off. And if you can learn that, then you can learn to survive.
Tell me about some of the men in the C Company.
You promise they won't see this?
Well, anything that you don't want them to hear, don't tell me.
There's nothing.
I didn't think so.
No, we had, when I wrote about it, I called them characters. We had a guy that called him Scrappy. That was his nickname. He was about 5'3", weighed about 130 pounds with a bucket of wet sand in each hand, and he was, in the States, he was notorious. Go to a bar, have a beer, have a fight. And somebody had to drag him out because otherwise they'd get killed, because everybody was bigger than him. And he was always fighting. And when he got overseas, he kept the nickname because he was a real fighter. And he had a knack for terrain. He could take his tank, and not knowing what's on the other side, excuse me, other side of the hill, but he would manage to get down, and he could keep away from the enemy fire. So his crew loved him. But he was the I'm losing my voice all of a sudden. He was the character that towards the end of the war, we came to a cut, which is it's a literal cut. It's cut through a hill, so where they put the road. So they were dangerous for us because the tanks were very vulnerable coming out of that cut. And Scrappy slowed down. He stopped the tank. He didn't want to go through that until we knew what the hell was there. At which point he looks at the hill up there, and it's wooded, and he sees somebody moving. We fired a shot up there. Guy comes out, camarade, fine. He said, let's move once time. And this guy starts down the hill, and another guy behind him, and another guy behind him. And this is somewhere in the military records I saw it. 2,500 guys walked out of there with their hands up, and we had 3 tanks and 1 kitchen truck and a medic truck. That was Scrappy. I mean, and he didn't need a Charles McIntyre. He's home now, dying. Excuse me. Did good with that until just now. But we had, let's see, a guy named Tarjack. He was about 6'2", weighed up 240 pounds, thin, all muscle, and was Polish, hated Germans. Oh, also hated his tank because it didn't run all the time. And when he would lose a track, you knew he lost a track because the first thing you heard was, "You're cut." What about the profanity on this tape?
This is real life.
Yeah, he says,
real life is real life.
He says, "You goddamn son of a bitch," and he felt he's got a big piece of iron, and he's hitting the tank. He's mad at the tank because the tank threw a tread. But this is the same guy that only needed one other person to put a tread back on, and it took 3 guys to put a tread on, but not with Tarjack. He heaved everything around, like with paper. Let's see who else. And we had an 8-ball, a real 8-ball. That's a negative individual. If you gave him a rifle, everybody ran like hell. If you put him in the kitchen, the meal was ruined. I mean, he couldn't do anything. There's only one thing he could do right. He could look at a radio and fix it. And in fact, when I was busy re-equipping my Jeep, the first of my Jeeps, so I could do my job, I didn't like this business of people hollering down the line because you couldn't hear them in firefight. So I got a radio, and he picked up a radio somewhere and fixed it up and put it in my Jeep. He had to do that 3 times. But he was a genius with radio. Nothing else. He couldn't even button his uniform right. And it was sad because it was very sad because he was a nice kid. He didn't survive. I mean, they needed somebody, a bow gunner in a tank one night. They put him in the tank, and the tank got hit. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people names like that. Now let's see who else. Then we had what I call the roarer. This was a little guy. He stood about 5'3", and he came up as our company commander. And he didn't need a radio.
What's his name?
He didn't need a radio. You could hear him a half a mile away. And he was very tough, very, very tough on the men, demanding as hell. And every time he had to write a letter to a family of somebody, he'd go crawl up somewhere and he'd scribble this letter. He'd come out. The first guy that walked near him got his head taken off. He was vicious, very angry. And he was soft as mush, naturally, but he wouldn't admit that. But he fought with everybody for his company. He would fight with battalion, he'd fight with division, he'd fight with corps. He would, don't bother me. We had an incident towards the end of the war where they would rush up maps to us of the area we were in, and they say, here's your objective, try and get there, and we'll get you more maps tomorrow night. Well, 11 o'clock in the morning, we would find the maps weren't good anymore. We were moving too fast. So we threw them over the side of the tank, and we said, let's go, what the hell. So we go on the next town, and battalion could call up and say, where are you? I said, well, where are you? He said, well, what coordinates on your map? He said, what map? I threw it away 8 hours ago. We don't need that. We ran away from that. Well, the battalion went crazy. They could not keep up with this guy. And he kept throwing the maps. Who needs the maps? There's a road. Let's go. And his name, Ernest Garneau. And then we had what I called, the quiet man. He was a guy actually he was from Southern Illinois. I wrote the story, thought he was from Tennessee. But he was a crack shot. He was brilliant with a rifle. So they made him a gunner, put him behind in a tank, And he was, to most of us kids, city kids especially, he was very, very weird. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he didn't cuss. Now, if you don't cuss and you're overseas in the Army in World War II, you are a very strange person. And because of this, he was very quiet, and he read his Bible very carefully every day. But if somebody said, here they come, he'd close up the Bible, put it in his pocket, get his gun ready, and blow the living hell out of anything that moved. And he was a godsend because he didn't drink or smoke, so we got his liquor rations, we got his cigarettes. It was terrific. But in the States, it was interesting because nobody would, even overseas when we went on pass, it was difficult to go with this guy because he was so nice and so quiet. You couldn't go to Paris and cat around. You couldn't really go and get drunk on lords. I mean, you were embarrassed to do this. You always felt like we were out with a priest. But I told you I had trouble with this. Shit. His name is George Warren Cox. He died just after St. Louis. So, this is the problem, what I was afraid of. Well, let's see. Then we had a guy named, this one I'd rather not name because it's not a pretty story. This was an officer and a gentleman by act of Congress. Both acts were not really good. They weren't correct, that's for sure. Very, very wide man. difficulty getting in and out of a turret, but a very officious type, and very much conscious of his rank as a first lieutenant. And his crew did not like him because he took the first billet, and when there was action, there was always something wrong with his tank. He was always backing away or moving over here, and other platoon commanders were saying, "Are you on my flank?" "Yeah, I'm on your flank." "I can't see you." "Well, I'm over there." He was about 1.5 miles away, and he was not a nice person, and nobody really liked him. And he had a habit of dropping his tank back near the kitchen truck. When I say that the columns consisted usually of a couple of tanks, mainly because we were always have some in repair, the medical jeep, me, and usually a kitchen truck when worn out scrounging for rations, and then the medical truck behind them. He would drop back, his tank would always drop back, and everybody else resented this because they were coming into tough areas, and he was the last one to a firefight and the first one out, And they had a problem one day, and he got caught, his tank got caught on the road. He tried to evacuate, and he couldn't get out of the tank. So the gunner, who wanted out real bad, the bow gunner, no, it was the gunner, just took his weapon and shoved it straight up, which took this officer out of the tank real fast. I mean, very efficiently. Aerodynamically unsound, but efficiently. And about a week later, at that point in time, we were in the habit of moving during the day, and then towards nightfall, we'd try and find some place and clear it out so we had a place to live. That meant putting all the inhabitants in the basement, just as we're in Germany, all right? Putting the inhabitants in the basement, except for the young ladies, and they stayed up to cook for us. And we just parked the tanks, just pulled everything under cover, and here come the mortars. Well, when the mortars come in, everybody in a tank stays in it. Everybody out of a tank goes back in it. I didn't have a tank, but I had a system. I got underneath the tank as fast as I could, And then his tank got hit, and everybody bailed out but this guy who couldn't get out of the turret. So again, somebody helped him out, and they didn't like him very much. They helped him out, and as he landed, so did a mortar shell. And the only thing they took back of him was his left boot. But it was good in a way. If you had to be a fatality in a tank, I prefer to see them hit by a sniper rather than trapped in the tank, which we had happen to us one day when we got caught by a bunch of SS tanks and couldn't go back, couldn't go forward, and one guy's tank caught fire, and I remember getting 3 guys out of that and trying to keep them comfortable in a ditch, because I couldn't get out of the ditch because they kept shooting at us. And then another tank caught fire, and I couldn't get out of the ditch at all. So we spent most of the day listening to them scream, which is, this is not a nice way. I mean, to this day, I can't stand the concept of cremation. And a lot of my friends, put in their will to be cremated, not me. Dog food maybe, but not cremated. But trying to think. Oh yeah, well, you heard about my pet phrase, Wells Day. You know what Wells Day is? Nobody does really know. Wells Day was based on the concept of the American tank having a 360-degree turret, which the Germans didn't have. And this was terrific, because you could fire from any, but you couldn't hit anything, go on the run, but you could fire. And problem was that if the welds broke, you had to go back to maintenance to get them fixed. Maintenance was back a couple of miles because the Armored Division moved in a column, and then they split off into separate different columns, combat commands. So they called up battalion from battalion C company. Says, what the hell is going on with you people? What's the matter with your tanks? You've got 2 or 3 of them up here now. Why? Well, the welds are broken. I says, well, so? I mean, we are fighting a goddamn war. Don't you know that up back there? You know, there was not too much level loss ever between the front lines and the rear troops. Well, no, but it seems a lot. And there was some thought given to it by the officers. They didn't say anything. One day we stopped, and one of the guys made steak, and commanding officer hears this weird bang, 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 bang. What is going on? It's one of the tank crews, very industriously, beating the hell out of this one weld so they can get back to maintenance for get 2 days off. Which is, you know, things like this were common. It's like, got into Bavaria, and one of the delicacies, we lived off the land as we moved because our rations were late catching up with us. And every tank had a comforter, a big thick feather comforter on it. And every tank had an old iron skillet, big frying pan. Because when you got to the barns early enough, quick enough, you found eggs, and they were usually buried in piles of hay on the ground, and the smoked beef was hanging from the rafters up there. And you made great big omelets, and you finally ate real food. Got down into the farm country, and we started finding jars of preserved Bing cherries, and they were delicious. And suddenly everybody in C Company was walking around with a soup spoon stuck in their boot. I mean, some of us carried knives on one side and soup spoons on the other. And the soup spoons were, of course, for the preserves. So they had a fire mission one day, and they called on these 2 tanks. The fire mission being you were like artillery. You'd back over, find a hill and come over the back side of it, and then you'd fire over it into. So they called for a fire mission, and this one tank plunks 3 rounds out, and the other tank, nothing. And get our radio. I says, "Come on, you're supposed to be firing." He said, "How can I fire?" I said, "I got 3 armor piercing and 112 jars of cherries in the ammunition racks." It's just, you know, the guy that could confirm that, Kozlowski, he's not with us anymore. But, we had an officer come down from battalion to inspect C Company in a rest area. We'd been pulled back for about 4 days. Big deal. So everybody's running around brushing and polishing, and you know, and what are you going to polish? We had these dirty tanker uniforms which were filthy, but they worked on the weapons. You know, they cleaned everything up, and in the middle of which they're going to call for a fire mission. So they start firing. There's one tank on the end doesn't fire a shot. So they're yelling on the radio, "Come on, you know, get those rounds off." They hadn't even taken the muzzle cover off yet. So excuse me. The bow gunner gets out of the tank, walks out to the end, pulls him, and starts pulling out all their dirty laundry. They stored it in the barrel because it was that way. When they pulled it out, they cleaned the barrel too. So our commanding officer was very embarrassed at that. But you know, the weird things. I'm trying to remember as I sit here. It's not easy, to be honest with you. Ask me a question. Go ahead.
C Company sounds like y'all had a good time in the fact that you could kind of, what do you say, serious but kind of let off the steam and stuff.
Yeah, this was true of almost any unit. Remember, you're talking about young men. And when I say young, I don't mean young in years. You had 20, 21. Hell, the old man in our outfit was like 32. But, as I said, considering the time we lived in, we grew up in, we were very young. A lot of things we didn't know. And you operated on fear because the philosophy was as long as you were afraid, you'd be careful, you'd live. But we had characters, and you needed and looked for release. You wanted something because you've been cooped up in a tank for 8 or 10 or 12 hours. Everybody's shooting at you, you're half deaf, you're choking on the smoke. And you get out of there and breathe fresh air, you want to do something different, no matter what it is, And crazy things, yeah, a lot of nutty stuff, but that was part of the whole deal. As far as the company itself is concerned, I was conscious of this as being an outsider. I had not gone through training with them, and therefore I was just a little bit removed, plus the fact that a lot of guys in the beginning resented the ASTP. Well, they called us the quiz kids. And there was a time when that phrase was a good opening to a fight. But C Company said, okay, fine, we need a medic. They made no bones about it. They wanted a medic close. So when I wanted radios, they didn't care, fine. But they accepted me very quickly, which surprised the hell out of me. But there were some not so nice people in the company because it was a conglomeration. And I had a few problems in certain quarters, but that's bound to be because you can't put 100 and some odd men in one place in one little stew pot and not have somebody bother somebody else. But we managed. It was, go ahead.
Did you ever have an assistant or anything, or was there just one medic for all of those?
It called for the TOE, the table of TOE called for, table of organization and equipment, called for 2 medics. There was only one. There was never 2. You don't forget, I was sent up there as punishment, so I was only an assistant. When the other guy was taken down, I was left there. About 6 weeks later, they sent an officer up because their roster showed me being on B Company at E2nd Medical. And as far as I was concerned, I didn't belong to them anymore. No way. So when they said, we're ready to take you back, I said, I'm not coming. So he went to the commanding officer and complained. The officer said, we have to have a medic. We got a medic, we'll keep a medic. And that was the end of that. But it was an interesting psychology. They knew I had no medical training. I mean, I made no bones about that. I carried a tool chest, which I collected everything I could scrounge off burnt out ambulances and steal from battalion. And these were all medicine, cough medicine, aspirin, all the stuff and I dispensed it based on my own instinctive knowledge of medicine from whatever my mother gave me, I gave them. Aspirin, cough syrup, whatever. The trouble with cough syrup was another problem. That was the fact that there was turpentine hydrate with codeine, which was standard cough medicine in the Army. And I had gallons of it. And I had one guy that had such a terrible cough. Every night I had to give him a dose. Then I was giving him a dose every morning before we started. Then he came to me during the day for more cough medicine. And I didn't know enough to realize that this guy was an addict. It never dawned on me. But I got so tired of being pestered by him that I said, look, if you're that sick and this is keep on, maybe we should send you back and have him. There's nothing wrong with me, just give me some more cough medicine. I said, And I tagged him and put him in an ambulance. And the irony of it is they got him back to a VAC hospital and took his appendix out. But this was the acceptance by the tank outfit of a medic was more generic than personal, I think, because they knew that if they were hit, somebody would take them and take them back to the evac hospital and save their lives, hopefully. So and it was, they had a lot of problems with it at first, because where does a medic drive his Jeep? Back of the column? Front of the column? I solved the problem by riding in behind the first tank. I figured that way. The first tank is the first one going to get hit, so I might as well be close. Why should I be back there? You know, it wasn't a very bright decision. I mean, I didn't say I was smart, but maybe that's why I ended up with 3 different Jeeps, because the first time I had no idea what was going on. I had just been told that if you think your Jeep is hit, bail out. So the first time something hit my Jeep outside of Herlesheim, I bailed out. It was a rock that bounced up from the road. I felt very stupid, but I was alone, so it was okay. But the second time I felt something hit the Jeep, I bailed out and looked back, and the front end of my Jeep was way down on the ground. Armor-piercing shell had hit the axle square on and gone right through and taken the axle and both wheels. They're out in the field. And I thought to myself, if it was an H, if it had been an HE, I wouldn't be here. Then the third Jeep, you're going to ask me where I got them from. Okay. The first Jeep, I went back to maintenance, and they didn't have any equipment, and how could I operate without a Jeep, you know? So they hitch a ride back to battalion, see what they can do. So I went back to battalion, and there were no spare vehicles in combat. So I waited around long enough until somebody walked away from the Jeep, and I jumped in the Jeep, took it back up to maintenance. They immediately painted over whatever was on the back of it. And they said, we'll take care of it. And within a half an hour, it was all painted up like a medical Jeep, and they handed it back to me. 3 days later, I heard reports about somebody was very upset. They were looking for a general's Jeep that had been stolen. I never said a word. But the third Jeep I got from a chaplain who heard me ranting and raving in battalion headquarters. He said, we'll take mine. But you go through equipment like that, and these guys would go to any lengths to be sure that there was that link between them and civilization, salvation, or whatever, you know. I don't blame them. I'd feel the same way if I'd been in a tank. But, no, riding a second vehicle was not bright. But we only had 3 or 4 at one time, so I was in a good position, with one exception. And there I was on this bright sunny day, driving down the road. We'd had a firefight. I had a guy with a bum arm. He was, the idea was that when you when I had one casualty, he would ride in the seat, because that's so he could push the button for the siren. They loved to do that. If I had 2, they got on the stretchers. You know, they were. So this time we're going down the road, and I had 2 casualties, one in back and one in the seat. And we stopped, ran into a firefight, and suddenly I look up, and this tank is backing up. And I'm on the radio screaming my head off. Of course, nobody can hear me, so I jumped out and I banged on a tank. And the tankers thought somebody was throwing grenades at him. So I ran back and I pushed this guy out of the driver's seat and dragged the other guy over, alongside the ditch. And I lay there while this tank very carefully went right up over the Jeep, flattened it. It was her father, Bob Grover. I wouldn't talk to him for a week. I was so angry.
Why did he know you were back there? What caused him to back up?
Got orders to reverse the column. He didn't know I was back there. He had no idea. They didn't have rear view mirrors on World War II tanks. So, when you sit and talk about it now, it's amusing and it's funny. But then it was a whole different thing. You didn't realize. It was purely, this way you develop. You grew up fast. You learned to appreciate every sunrise, because we got into this. Oh boy, we made it through another day. That was the most important thing.
Did y'all talk about that? Or was it something just each of you did in your own mind?
No, we talked about it. There were a couple of us that would sit around and realize that we were living on an hour-to-hour basis, day-to-day, minute-to-minute. And we had to accept it because, what else were we doing? Resignation wasn't effective in those days. So you just took it in stride. And actually, I think today you would probably call them support groups. But in those days, we all sat around and talked, and we all felt a little better for it. We scared ourselves sometimes, but that's beside the point.
Was that something that was unique to your group, or do you think that was...
I haven't the slightest idea. I've talked to guys about how I developed this philosophy, and they look at me like I'm queer. Okay, fine. There's some people, some guys, there are some very stolid people in the world that nothing affects, It's like one of the standbys for stolidity and going, real strong, was a tank commander who, the first time we opened the gates of a concentration camp and he saw what was in this great big pit, when he realized that there were human bodies still alive in this thing, he turned white, threw up, and wouldn't get back in the tank. And I said I had to tag him, send him back. He never showed up again. It just broke him completely at that particular moment. There's no telling what it takes, how people can exist. Cold in here. As far as other outfits are concerned, I think so to some extent. It's human to want to share your troubles. We had enough of them to share those days, too.
Tell me, where were you at Herlesham?
Let's see. They went into Herlesham, and I can't give you dates like some of these guys can. I didn't keep notes, and it wouldn't have made any difference because I would have lost them when I lost the Jeeps. Lost everything else I had. Another thing I remember going along this road where I jumped out of the Jeep for no good reason. I was told to go into the town because the aid station had casualties that had to be evacuated. So I went down this road, got to the first building, and I didn't know where the aid station was, and they didn't put signs up in those days. But I saw a guy scurrying in and out of a building, so I ran down there, and I said, this is the aid station. And there was a Ford observer there who's been shot down that morning. And he was wounded, but not terribly, so he helped me put some guys on the stretchers. And excuse me, I took them out, back down the road. Nobody fired him, fine. Went back in and got trapped. Couldn't bring the Jeep out, couldn't bring casualties out. And somebody said, well, there's a light tank around here somewhere. I said, well, get him over here, so I never did find out who it was. But this guy had a tank, and this is himself and the driver. Everybody else was a casualty. So he buttoned up and went down the road, and I went alongside of him in protection, and I got him out. I think I took out about 9 total people. No, I didn't see 2, 4, 5, about 10 or 11 actually. It got to a point where I threw one on top of the other, and just to get them out, But you were, in some ways, sort of a glorified chauffeur. It's, I'm trying to think back at some of these characters, some people you want to know about C Company. Most of them aren't printable, unfortunately, or repeatable on television. Not for posterity. Well, it's I don't know how you handle the word, but the standby conversation in World War II was the F word. It started every sentence, finished every sentence, and was in the middle of every sentence, because if you couldn't use that word and let loose, then you couldn't say what you want to say. And my great story, one of the stories about that is the battalion geniuses developed a code. If you need a 75 millimeter AP armor piercing, you can Lucky Strikes. On Monday was Lucky Strikes, on Tuesdays was Chesterfields, and then if you needed AP or HU, Lucky Strikes or Camels. And they were very strict about this. You had to use the proper radio procedure. So one guy comes in one night, and he's point tank, and they're beating up on him pretty bad. And he says, "Hello, battalion. This is Charlie 10, whatever it was. Charlie, I need some 75 millimeter ammunition real fast because I'm running low. Will you please observe proper procedure? What type of today's code?" And he says, "I don't have the code book. I need the ammunition. I'm running low. And there's a tank out there. I want to get it." "Sorry, we can't handle any requests unless they're in the proper code." At which point there's a thunk that everybody could hear on every radio. Evidently, the German tank had fired, and it was thankfully, was a dud, and it made a terrible noise, which rebounded in everybody's earphones. And the battalion character says, "Well, there's some interference. Would you mind repeating your request?" Now you can cut this out of your tape, because the guy says, "Look," he says, "just send me some fucking ammunition and shut up." The stress, the trying to marry Army regulations, Army procedures with real life was interesting me, because I'd been in the ROTC and I'd watched this, and I'd been in basic, and I'd watched the old give way to the new to some extent. I mean, when I went in the Army, they wanted me to be a dog robber. I should be a valet to an officer, which I absolutely refused. But procedure was still existing in those days. And when you're overseas and you ran into these idiot regulations, last night, Lise Pomois' narration of where intelligence, there were only a few scattered troops in the Steinwald. Yeah, a few scattered tanks, like half a battalion of SS tanks sitting there waiting for the 23rd to drive in. So Army intelligence, that when it first became an oxymoron, and still is. And you had a real problem whether you were a commander, an officer, or whether you were an enlisted man, because the difference between an enlisted man and an enlisted man in the American Army and the German Army is the German Army, Feldwebel, the sergeant got his orders and the patrol took off. Killed the sergeant, the patrol went back because they didn't know what to do. American Army, a sergeant got his orders, he discussed it with every individual. So you had literally 12 patrols loose. Well, how do you reconcile that with some idiot order from battalion headquarters? There's no connection whatsoever with the terrain you're on or anything else. So you improvise and you want to go from point A to point B, and battalion says, "Well, you go through B and stop and you'll pick up so-and-so and make a left turn." And then some kid from Kansas will say, "The hell with that. Let's just go straight over there and get it." Most of the time, that was a much better way to do it. But it made for some very rebellious situations. And this is where the people who used to be, they were called characters, and they were called rebels, and so on and so forth. But these were guys, and officers and men alike, that wanted to get a job done. And let's do it now and get it over with. Well, maybe it'll shorten it a little bit. It didn't, but sometimes,
So where did you fit into that?
You mean as far as me personally?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. I was okay, like out overseas. I tried to hit the commanding officer of the medical battalion with an axe. I got into a tank company, and they didn't mind a rebel as long as I did what I was supposed to do. So I wore weapons in violation of all the rules and regulations, and I fought as an infantryman. I went on patrol. I stood guard, We weren't very tall on men. We had a very big shortage, and everybody had to do something. And where did I stand? I was sitting by the side of the road one day, and this Jeep pulls up, and he's flying this white flag like it was starched. It was so. Of course, mine is hanging there with about umpteen holes in it. And the guy sitting at the wheel is wearing the medical helmet with the emblems and the brassard, and he's got Colonel's birds. And he says, "Soldier," he says, "you ever find a medic?" And I says, "I'm the medic." And he looks over at me and he says, at that point I still had my medical helmet on the floor, and I was wearing the 3rd Army helmet. And he says, "But you're not dressed according to the rule, the code." I says, "I know." I says, "But I don't want to be a target." He says, "I don't understand. The Geneva rules of war." I said, "Wait a minute, Colonel, let me explain it to you." And I threw the helmet, my medical helmet, out about 50 yards, 20 yards maybe. I pulled out a P-38, which is a captured German pistol, and I put 2 rounds in it. And I says, "That's why I won't wear the helmet. That's why I won't. I covered the side, and if I could hide the damn flag, I would." So he looked at me for a minute. He said, "What's your name, soldier?" So I told him. And he drove away. But he never did anything. So when the rules of warfare are one thing, but survival is another, and he knew it. He was smart enough to realize that. As far as you asked me where I fit in, I don't think I ever fit in. Not really. I was too much of an individualist. I hated taking orders, especially stupid ones.
Okay. Tell me the first time that you had to, if you don't mind telling us some situations where, I'm assuming that you were supposed to not, with the rules, you were not supposed to be a target, were you?
World War I, they observed the Red Cross. Medics would come out on the field, they'd stop the firing, pick up the wounded. World War II, medics came out on the field, they blew their ass away. You came out with a white flag, forget it. So, as far as I was concerned, it was very basic. If I'm going to survive, I'm going to fight back. And if it means I have to walk around armed to the teeth, I will, and I did. As far as doing my job, I did my job. But if I had the opportunity, which I had fairly more than often than not, I would grab a gun and shoot. Why not? I didn't look upon my job as the way the Army did. I couldn't, because it wasn't practical. Did I answer your question?
That's exactly what
Okay.
I asked. Okay. If you were to look at, you've had so many experiences, but if you were to close your eyes and think about something that always comes to your mind, is there one time, one incident that always comes to your mind?
I beg your indulgence, because I don't think I can go through with this, but I'll try. March. Just crossed over the Rhine. We were in Germany, and got a call on the radio. The medical call signs that they used to summon the medics in my company, it was very simple. BRAD. That worked better. And I heard people screaming for me one morning, so I go charging up with my little Jeep, you know. And they stopped me about the second tank. Lead tank had gone up on a hill and lost a tread to an 88. These guys were trapped up there. And they said, "Can you do anything for them?" You know what? I was too young to know. It was stupid. I got in the Jeep and I went up on a hill. I mean, doesn't everybody, you know? And I climbed up on the tank. We saw today's tanks, and I couldn't climb up on those without a step ladder. So I climb up on the tank, and I flip up the hatch, and I go to pull this guy out. And the trouble is that he'd been hit with a Panzerfaust, and we hadn't realized it, and all I got was from here up. But for graves registration purposes, I had to have the 5 bodies out. So I pulled. I pulled the 5 bodies out. Sorry. I told you I wouldn't be able to do that. That's a tough one. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
What was the biggest victory you had? Something that you...
Getting out of my uniform?
Okay. Before that. Okay. When you accomplished something that you, whether it was to save a man or to do something, what was the biggest victory that you had? That I did this, or when you look back on?
I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question. As far as my function, my duties, whatever I did, that was my victory. The idea that of all those guys that I hauled back, they lived. That's all I could do. I could grow to hate you very quickly. You know that, don't you?
No.
Oh, you're pushing buttons I haven't pushed in a long time, kid.
Sorry. No,
No, it's okay.
It's okay. It's part of the story.
No, I don't mind.
But see, again, just like I said last night, unless we know the stories, will it not happen again?
Well, this is why I was one of the first 2 guys to push for the ACU. I still believe that I have all kinds of opposition from, I'm not that active anymore, but basically I think that every penny we have should go into a scholarship fund to endow study in the history of World War II armor, because it's more refined today, of course. It's all electronic. The one question that came to mind in the motor park yesterday was these electronic tanks, these monsters. The tank that we functioned would fit between the treads of that tank you saw yesterday and be only half as long. And everything electronic, you don't have in there as a shower. But my question was, what happens when they pull the plug and all this doesn't work? If any of this can convince people that there's a better bloody way of doing this than fighting it. Of course, you'll never get rid of wars, but let's cut them down a little bit, for God's sake. Excuse me. This is why I believe in it, because I think that the generation that's growing up now is not getting the education because there are too many schools that have skipped over the World War II in favor of Vietnam and Korea. And this is not where it belongs. And I'm sorry I keep moving and he keeps refocusing, driving him nuts. But no, it has to be done. And relating all the experiences, there are all kinds of funny things, but some tragic things naturally. But it has to be taken in the context of the times, which they don't seem to do anymore when they talk about history. And I'm very resentful of the analysis of World War II actions based on 1998 concepts, which is wrong. I had a letter I printed, when I was running the Hellcat News, I printed a letter from a story from some guy back in 1942. And I got a letter from a widow of a retired officer who complained that she thought it was a racial thing that I used the word Japs. And I says, well, it is now, but it wasn't then. And now when people are trying to rewrite history and say we never should have dropped the atom bomb because look at all the people we killed. Well, yeah, but we also ended a war. I mean, you can't use tomorrow's principles to condemn what I do today. And as far as World War II is concerned, I don't say it was justified. No war is justified. We had no choice, and take a walk through, like we did, through Landsberg, and when we liberated it, and this one guy collapsed. The rest of us were so busy crying and throwing up, it was pitiful. But none of us, I mean, even, this is at the end of combat, we hadn't seen. I mean, the pits were bad enough with the bodies and the quicklime, and some of the bodies were still alive. But when we got to the ovens, that destroyed us completely. And I come home, and a year later some guy says there never was a Holocaust, it never existed, it was propaganda. Baloney. But this has to stop. I mean, people have got to learn what happens when you lose control.
I'm going to go back and ask you about Lieutenant Colonel Montgomery Meigs. Did you know him?
No, I did not. I came into the company a week after he was killed.
What kind of condition was the company in a week after he was killed? Was it just...
He was a battalion commander. Everybody was very upset. It was the initial combat action for the 23rd. They really didn't know what they were doing. And there's a character that's still around, which I will not name, who was in the tank with Meigs, right there. And as he says, the order that Meigs finally obeyed, he objected to violently. If he had objected and not, he's a West Pointer, he had to follow orders, so he followed orders and got killed. But it was a dumb move. It turned out to be a very idiotic step. Everybody was very upset. But remember, even when you lost a loved officer, and C Company lost a company commander, he was very well liked. Even when that happened, part of you learned real fast, even as a young kid, part of you could grieve. But the rest of you had better stay alert, otherwise something's going to blow your head off. You just didn't get careless, because if you got careless, you were a casualty. It's that simple.
Okay, let's... you got out of Herlesheim, and what was the next big action that you were involved in, or was it just a day-by-day thing?
Wherever the C Company went, I went. So when they were moving and in action, I was in action. There was no, as I say, I don't have that clear a memory of too many towns. I remember towns where there was a lot of beer. I remember other towns where, other things. But we were always in action. If we were in a rest area, fine. Other than that, we're out moving somewhere, and I was second or third line, and that was that. That was just the way I lived.
I got the impression from from Lisa's tape last night, that the 23rd was always out there. I mean, there was... Yeah,
they were in the front. Well, you had CCA, CCB, and CCR, and to this day I don't remember whether I think we were CCR, but when the column moved, we were in front, and which is why we never had enough tanks. It was always, even without the welds, they were back there being fixed. So our column was not that big. We had a tank, medic jeep, a tank, hopefully a couple of half-track full of infantry, which always helped to have around, because when you, later on, when the Panzerfaust came into existence, you know, we came up against it, they'd hide in foxholes alongside the road. And if the tanks saw them in time, they'd run in one tread right over the foxhole and get rid of them. If they didn't, then we'd depend on the infantry to pull, you know, smoke them out. But that was the whole column. Then our kitchen truck was there and not there, because to get rations he had to go back. And our cook was a guy named Angel, was a real character. But after a while we realized that his pet food to prepare for us was white bread and Spam. And I have yet to eat Spam, and when I was a kid I liked it, but I wouldn't touch it. We lived on that for a long time, which is why we did a lot of scrounging in the countryside. And I did a lot of stealing when every time I went near a battalion. In the winter time I'd steal socks and rations and whatever I could get away with, you know. Midnight requisitioning was the proper phrase, I believe. But no, it's not quite. You were either rest area or you're moving, you know. We never went backward. That's one thing I must say. We always went forward. I suppose that's good. Even now, I'm not sure.
Tell me about, we were talking at the table last night about when the infantry started riding the back of the tanks.
The colored infantry.
Oh. Company D's.
The Company D, yeah. The infantry rode the tanks, but they didn't like riding the tanks. Most of the infantrymen did not like riding the tanks because the first thing tanks drew was small arms fire. Machine gun rifle. And you don't want to be sitting on a tank when they start spraying 30 caliber around. You get the hell off as fast as you can. The only ones that rode the tanks that got a kick out of it, and this guy came into our hospitality suite last night to thank us for the free ride. One of the guys that was on board those tanks, black.
On the 17.
Yeah,
Yeah,
D Company 17.
Yeah. He told me in his interview about he used to ride tanks, and it was the 23rd, came up to be the 23rd.
I hope. This guy looks like he's about 18 years old.
Andrew Nix.
Yeah, God, it's scary. But the contingent was sent up to us. It was interesting. They were Port Battalion out of Marseille, and they volunteered because they were real short of bodies in January in Germany. So they shipped them up to us, and 3 o'clock in the morning, get rousted out, help these guys, show them how to use an M1. They had no basic training. So we're teaching them how to load an M1. I should keep your thumb out, you know, so on and so forth. And we had a lot of Southerners in our outfit, die-hard Southerners. And the idea of a black man, what the hell are you doing that for? They're going to run tail the first time somebody fires a shot. And first time I heard that line was on the radio when they heard that the 700 and something tank destroyer unit was coming up on the left and they were going to hit these tanks. And the guy says, bet you 100 francs they turn and run. He was from Alabama. And one of the guys says, well, I'll take that bet. Another guy says, I'll bet you 200, and they're going like this. And this tank destroyer outfit turned out to, at the end of the war, they'd kill off more tanks than some of the army divisions did. But these guys that came up to us had nothing. Helmets, rifle belts, rifles, ammunition, bayonets, canteens, and not too sure how to use them. But they had something that they used real good, that they knew how to handle. It's called a straight razor. That long and it folds up. That everybody had. First time we moved out with the black infantry, they got out of their half tracks. Some of them were riding on the tanks, some of the half tracks. They got out of their vehicles, started walking down the road, and one of our tank commanders yelling, where the hell are you going? Wait and see what's going on. He said, we'll find out, we'll find out. And got about halfway down the road, they had Negro, non-coms, and white officers. They gave an order, and all these guys take out these bayonets and put them on the ends of their rifles, and they go trotting around the corner. We thought they were nuts. And we turned the corner, and they were. The Germans were running like hell. These guys were busy cutting them to ribbons, not with bayonets. They used the razors for that. And after that, the colored infantry, you know, when the story was told last night about the guy, colored infantryman walks up to the tanker and he says, "Where's that shot come from?" He says, "Over there in the woods." He says, "See you later." And he said, "Where you going?" He says, "I'll see you later." And they circled around, picked off the tank, and came back with 14 rifles, 8 revolvers, and a whole bunch of souvenirs. They were fighters. They were tough. But that was the first integration attempt, and it was classic because a lot of people objected to it. But they loved riding on the tanks. They thought it was terrific. Of course, it beat walking, you know. It wasn't a very smooth ride, but it beat walking.
So, do you think generally it worked out in the end? Did the Southerners and the black soldiers kind of come to an understanding, or?
Even our Southerners were sorry to see him leave, believe me. Because they were good soldiers.
Tell me about can you tell me about Landsberg?
Driving down the road, and one of the tankers says, "Hey, there's somebody over there in the woods." Well, in our parlance, anybody in the woods is an enemy, and you blow them away quick. And then one of the gunners says, "Well, hell yeah, I got him in my sights, but it's only one guy, and he's wearing a funny-looking uniform." And they come out of the woods, come onto the road towards us. Very funny-looking uniform. With the striped jackets and a striped pant and a striped hat, some without jackets. And as they got closer, we realized they were so thin. It was incredible. One holding the other, they could hardly walk. And they kept saying, First they were terrified until they realized we were Americans. Then, as soon as somebody recognized it, Amerikanisch, these guys cry and wave their arms, and they wanted food. And we decided we better not feed them because we didn't know what their condition was, but a couple of guys gave them rations, and they gobbled them up. And then one of our tankers jumped down, because most of them spoke GI German, which is terrible German, and we didn't understand these people. But this guy jumps out, he says, "I know that, that's Polish." So he starts talking to him. He says, "There's a camp up there, a lot more like this, you know." So that's when we drove up through Landsberg, and on the left was this great big pit. And we didn't pay much attention to it. Look at it a second time and realize it was, I guess about 40 foot long, maybe 20 foot wide. It was piled high with what we realized were bodies. And some limbs were still moving. So by that time the barracks were emptying out, and these guys were coming out screaming and yelling, you know. And our Polish interpreter says, "Where are the Germans? Where are the Germans?" He said, "The SS went that way, out the back gate." So then they insisted we come and look at the ovens. And it was still warm. And you all seen pictures of the ovens, you know what the hell it was like. It was a nightmare then, and it's a nightmare now. Will you pick a question that doesn't break me up?
I gave you a break from it.
Yes, I know.
Tell me about the funniest thing that ever happened to you besides the tank getting run over. The most
Tank
hilarious.
getting my Jeep run over was not funny. I don't
It is now.
It wasn't then, that's for sure. The funniest?
The funniest thing, when you think of, just makes you want to just laugh.
No, first I got to censor it.
Oh, okay.
How do I do this without producing an X-rated tape?
Maybe the second one then.
I'm not much better than the first.
Okay.
All right. What I thought was funniest was we had a cook, and this cook loved to bed down with any local girl in France that he could find. And in France we ate a lot better. He did a lot more cooking. But he was always sending his assistant out to bring a girlfriend in for him. This may not be very palatable for your documentaries, but it's the truth. And again, there's one French town, and the gopher finally finds a girl. Okay, fine, she'll come in. She knows what she's being called in for, but she's being promised 2 loaves of white bread. Now, white bread in French is gâteau, which is cake. They looked upon it as cake. And this was a real find because food was short in those days. So she's not really anxious to get into this kind of a trade, but this town had been occupied by the Germans, so we knew that, So anyway, gets in there, and the cook had his approach was a little bit less than subtle, and she did not appreciate it. As we found out later, because we're listening, we're out over there, and the truck is over there. He's taken over the kitchen of one of the homes and everything else, and we're listening, and he says, I hear his voice, for God's sake, stop running. And a whole bunch of pots fall down, and he says, God damn it, stand still. More pots. She hasn't said a word yet. She spoke no English, accordingly. So finally, we hear this cook, and he's cursing a blue streak. He is just so upset. He can't catch her. She's fast. He is. And he says, all I want to do is talk. Just stand. I just want to talk for a little bit. And noise. And she must have thrown everything in the kitchen at him twice. Finally, he says, all right, now, let's talk. And the gopher was peeking. And he says, she looked up and he says, you up to no good, you son bitch. End of story, end of cook, end of the whole thing. But one of the great defects of the American when it comes to language is the assumption that as long as they don't speak English, you're not too intelligent. And it happens over and over again. But the other one was not so funny. They called me out just after the war was over. And they said one of the boys had been hit. So I run out, and this guy's got bleeding like a pig, laying on the ground. He's got a hole in his head. I says, how did this happen? Who did it? We don't know. He just stumbled out a minute ago and fell. And I check, and he's still alive. He's still breathing. And I look at the hole, and it's a small hole. So I ran my hands around the back of his head, and sure enough, there was a lump back here. So I threw him in the Jeep and ran back to the aid station, and I told him, the doctors weren't around. I said, let's open this guy's head up in the back. He said, well, you crazy? Let's try it. Slit, 22 caliber slug. You talk about hard heads. It went in here, went around, and lodged in the back. So all he really had was a scalp tear. And I said to him, how did you act? He said, he made a friend who took him up to her room. And he said, that's all he remembers. I said, you got to be kidding. I mean, somebody pulled a gun on you who don't remember? He said, no, I don't remember. So a couple of the guys went up to the room, hauled this girl out, young lady, very poised, very, very German, and very upset with being disturbed. And we look around, we find a couple of drops of blood on the floor near the door, and I said, all right, why did you shoot him? Me, I. So we were very suspicious of. We had just moved into Germany. It was over, and we didn't trust anybody. So I told the guys, all right, grab a hold and we'll start looking. So one of the guys grabs her and pushes her against the wall, and suddenly spins her around. She had a .22 caliber pistol taped to the small of her back. So when we discovered that and pulled it off, we said, what are you doing? He said, well, I've got 7 rounds. I intend to kill 7 Americans. But of course, to me, the funniest part was the hardhead, who, well, I think he ended up with a scar the size of a pinhead or something. But he was lucky.
Where were you when you found out the war was ending? Or when you realized that it was coming to an end? Or at what point did you think that it's coming to an end?
Well, we had gotten as far as a barn outside of Kufstein, Austria. And for some reason or other, a bunch of guys went into the barn. And it got mortared. And they start screaming bloody murder. So I ran in. Most everybody was just fragments. So I dragged them all out and I said, get in the Jeep and we'll go back to aid station. And it took a couple of mortar shells. Fragments flew up and hit part of my side of the Jeep and the steering wheel, cut open my hands and everything else. Got back to the aid station. And one of the officers says, what happened? I told him. He says, you're kidding. I look at him. I said, what do you mean I'm kidding? I said, there's 9 guys out there with holes in them. What are you talking about? He said, well, I heard the war was over. That was the last action that I remember.
Did you leave at the end of the war? Did you go home? Did you have enough points to go home, or did you stay in Europe for a while?
I had enough points. Came my turn, I went home. I could have stayed. A lot of us could have stayed, but I wanted to go home. I'd about had it. A lot of people's lives might have been changed if we had decided to stay over there, because the opportunities were tremendous. But we weren't soldiers born and true. We were citizen soldiers, we were kids. And now we were men and we want to go home. That was enough.
So when did you get home? And what was it like to go home? So your mom and dad were both still living?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Got home in December. My father had very judiciously, at my request, gone around to all his friends, and we had a total of 8 bottles of liquor, wine, liquor, very rare in 1944, 45. And my cousin had come home from, he'd been in the Air Force in Italy. My other cousin died, killed in action. So Seymour came over, and my father and Seymour and I sat there the first night, and I got roaring drunk, and it was a pleasure. And my mother kept saying, why were you there so long? You didn't fight in the wintertime. You always go into winter quarters. She never did understand that they fighting in the snow time. To her, winter was when the armies went back home and, took it easy until spring and started up all over again. And I stayed in New York, I think, 4 days. And I got on a train and went to Chicago and never went home again.
What did you do? What have you done? What has been your career since then? And did the war make a difference in what you became?
I'd always been torn between 2 things, journalism and medicine. But when I got home, and my mother, who was a slightly little domineering type, decided, she said, well, you're going to go to medical school now. So I looked at her and looked down at my hands, and as far as I could see, my hands were filthy with blood. And I says, no. If I'd waited 2 years, I might have gone back to medicine because I wanted to, but I just couldn't handle it. Emotionally, I wasn't ready. I went back to school, and I took my second love, journalism, but I didn't graduate because I had taken shrapnel in my hands and they started to get real bad. And I finally had to leave school. In fact, my last term at school, I couldn't write my finals. So my fiancée, later my wife, came down, and all the professors allowed me to dictate my finals. And then I went to work for a newspaper. And believe it or not, I joined the National Guard. Not because of any other reason except that they paid a good fat sum for summer camp and I needed the money. So then I shifted over to, I went to work for a public relations outfit and absorbed finally by an airline and worked for them in public relations until I retired in 1980.
There's so many things in you that 2 hours can't even touch, so I may not be through with you yet. But anyway, I mean, there's too
Forget Covington.
No, I'll call you before I schedule anybody else, because I need some more time with you. Do you have children?
One large, not so economical size boy.
Okay.
He lives in Springfield, Tennessee, about 25 miles from me, which is why I moved to Nashville, and he practices medicine. Someday I'll get it right, but right now he's still practicing.
If you as you look through all of your experiences, and there would be some child who watched this film in 25, 30 years, and today you're going to tell them something that you want them to remember, what would it be?
Dirty question. You know it. I'm intemperate. I got a miserable temper. I hate bigotry, but I've turned into a bigot in part because of where I used to live. Say it.